And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by our good friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host. I am the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I'm Matt Brown. I'm joined here by my friend and colleague, Bryan Fischer. I want to go ahead and just get this out on the table in the very beginning. I would like to preemptively apologize if I sound ridiculous over the course of the next this recording. I am losing my voice, which is unfortunate for someone that has to talk for a living. I'm not sure if this is just because the weather is changing. I don't know if it's because I'm in close proximity to a 4-year-old who is just then a germ vector of all levels. I know it's not the coronavirus. I've checked. I've tried to be responsible here. I'm just, I think I've had 26 different of those little lozenges, and it's helping a little bit. But please forgive me if I sound like I have a frog in my throat, or if I picked up a cigarette habit here over the past couple of days. I promise I haven't.
I was going to say your 3-pack a day habit there is not doing you too well, but it adds to the grovelly nature of podcasting. I think it could end up working out well if you could at least keep the same level here for the entire episode.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best to challenge my inner Schnellenberger as we knock this out. This is it's been I think a pretty fun couple of days across our little sector of the internet from what we're publishing. I know this isn't maybe the most attractive week of football games, but I think we've been doing some interesting stuff off the field. There's some interesting things happening since our last show. I thought we could start maybe by talking a little bit more about a story that I just filed at Extra Points. The full story is behind the paywall, but I think we can talk about this at a high level. I talked to a couple of individuals that are running an NIL collective, and I recognize that alone is not an interesting story because there's like over 110 of these, and a lot of them share a lot of similarities. This collective is different because it's not supporting an athletic department. It's not supporting football and men's basketball players. It's just supporting one Olympic program, a women's sports program. And there aren't very many NIL collectives that are dedicated to women's sports. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the only one whose sole purpose is to support a gymnastics program. I was talking to folks supporting the Utah Red Rocks women's gymnastics team. And they have a collective that's going to be, I think, officially dropping in the next 8 weeks. And what was, I think, there were two things about this group that there are really unique. And you, Bryan, you probably already knew this, but like, I don't think I appreciated just how crazy attendance draw Utah gymnastics is. Like, they outdraw the men's basketball team. This is a revenue sport, even without any fancy television deal, because they get 15,000 people in there a night every single night, right?
Yeah, it's probably one of the better atmospheres I think you'll find west of the Mississippi, and they're not the only certainly gymnastics program that is a bit of a draw locally. I think in the Pac-12 there's several good ones drawing on that Olympic nature, but you go back down to the South. I mean, Alabama, Auburn, Florida. Like there are a lot of those programs. LSU, exactly. There are a lot of those programs that you are consistently drawing into the five figures, and that's very impressive. And I think kind of owes to not only is it important to kind of spotlight those sports, but like it's great to kind of see communities embracing a lot of these Olympic athletes and these Olympic sports, because it's great for the schools. This is kind of what the original purpose of college athletics was all about, was not just to be that front porch for the university, but to kind of make those connections with the community. So it is a terrific atmosphere. I'm gonna have to find a way to kind of make my way to go see one of those gymnastics meets. I think at some point the near future, but it is quite the scene there. At least watching on TV a couple times.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to completely packed women's Olympic sport events. I've been to Wisconsin volleyball. I've been to Nebraska volleyball. They're cool as hell, right? I've been to gymnastics meets before in the Big Ten, where it's not quite as big of a thing, even if the quality of competition is very strong. But there's two things, other things about the collective beyond the fact that a unique market that separate itself. One is who's running it. Because there have been a couple of people in Utah that have apparently cut big checks to allow the entity to give all of the money to athletes. Most collectives right now don't. They usually take some operating percentage, whether that's 10 or 20, and sometimes more than that percent, to pay for staffers or administrative fees, which is not uncommon in the nonprofit world anyway. Like fundraising takes time and money and phones and everything. So you're 100% of the money is going to the athletes, and your governing board though are not just a lot of ex-gymnasts, of which several still live in and around Salt Lake City, but you have Chris Hill, who used to be the athletic director. You have multiple former athletic department personnel, old SIDs, old sports-specific administrators, old development officers. There are a couple of ex-ADs that are working in collectives. I think at Indiana, their old athletic director is involved. I want to say there's a couple other ones.
A lot of like kind of I guess mid-level staffers,
Yeah,
if you want to
that's
say,
pretty common.
your associate ADs that for development and assistant ADs, that type has also really gotten into the the collective world, I guess you could say, at places like, as you mentioned, Indiana, Kansas, some others, like I think that is becoming a very
Georgia.
interesting career path, for a
Yeah.
lot of these people, in that, you're still kind of basically doing the same thing. You're still raising money. You're still making those connections with donors, only you're just not doing it for kind of a state entity, in a lot of cases. So it's definitely added to, I think, that the kind of head count in terms of the industry in some respects.
I'm not surprised when I hear about a 35-year-old associate AD of development moving to a collective that might potentially offer a better quality of life and a different relationship with donors. Like, I get that. That's an important experience for these groups to have, because a lot of these collectives don't have any either institutional knowledge or development knowledge or even local community knowledge, right? They just have money. So the Utah one has a lot of a lot of old timers, which I'm saying this not pejoratively, like people who really understand Utah and Utah Utes and the Crimson Club and the athletic department there. But you also have it's an entity here where, I mean, you're not a 501c3, but you're still orienting around charity, and you're orienting around one very specific sport where you're trying to fundraise in a different area. Like, this is the concern that you and I have talked about, our peers have talked about it. It's written a lot. You have a lot of ADs that, even though this hasn't happened a ton yet, are concerned about money that goes to NIL collectives being diverted away from capital projects, or being diverted away from scholarships, or being diverted away from anything that might fund the athlete experience. I'm making air quotes here with my fingers. And we would probably think that this might be a good thing for some of that money to be rediverted, but we're not ADs. Our mortgage does not depend on this world. And you can understand why there's a finite number of donors, right? With the Red Rocks group here, the Who Rocks the House collective, they are trying to build everything here mostly centered around small donors, people that aren't currently giving to the athletic department, because they figure, look, if you got 14,000 people in the arena, and almost all of them have not given to the Crimson Club before, for the way this was explained to me, and this would be similar to college volleyball, I think. These are pretty family-centered crowds. There's a lot of 10-year-old girls in the audience for these things here. It's an affordably priced ticket. A lot of minivans in the parking lot, right? Which is great. You get these guys in the building. If you are able to activate 7,000 of them, paying $5 a month, $10 a month, 6,000 of them, you're not necessarily I mean, it's not like that was going to go to the football NIL group or to the next capital campaign, but they do want to be a part of something. And that, in a world where there's not a whole lot of other groups, can be really meaningful, either in recruiting or in retention or in, promoting experience, what have you. So if I was somebody of means that really cared about Wisconsin volleyball or LSU gymnastics or Texas softball or some of these other entities, I think this is a model that could be replicated. It probably can't be replicated 35 different times, but I think it could be replicated enough where it could be pretty meaningful to some programs.
Yeah, and I think engaging that level of donors or potential donors, I think is huge. You look at just kind of the untapped market at a lot of people. There's only a certain percentage of your fan base that is paying those fees to your booster organization to get tickets in kind of the lower bowls of your football stadiums or near the court on basketball. So there's still a lot of people that are just kind of, yeah, they maybe are season ticket holders, but a lot of them are a little more casual and passive fans, but still may want to support the program in a meaningful way. And I think the unique nature of Utah gymnastics, I think, is contributing to this. But you're right. I think this is something that could end up happening for a lot of sports. I think baseball would be the top one.
Yeah.
I think we've already started to see places like Texas A&M develop some more collectives and focus on NIL surrounding some of those non-revenue sports. Although for a lot of those cases in baseball and the SEC, they are revenue sports. But
Some places.
it's I think contributing a lot to how can we make sure that these athletes are taken care of, and we're seeing some unique ways. And it's interesting that this is happening at Utah, and you wrote the story this week because the Utes were in not just for their upset of USC on last Saturday, but they were in the news because AD Mark Harlan was speaking to Pat Forty and talking about we had a tight end, and he ended up getting $1 million offer and ended up staying. Well, it's just like, there are certain amounts certainly on the football side, but these Olympic sport athletes, they have a huge market as well. As you mentioned, they're packing the Huntsman Center there with 15,000 people. There is a market for name, image, and likeness for some of those gymnasts. And I think this is the rise of these collectives. I mean, you look even going down to Auburn, I think Suni Lee would not be at Auburn if it were not for, name, image, and likeness being, in legislation and kind of going enacted. And it's also interesting to note that this is all going to be set against some likely new rules coming out of the NCAA and in the national office, probably as soon as next week and as soon as early next week, regarding some of the crossover, I guess you could say, between what the athletic departments can do or can't do with regards to talking with these collectives with name, image, and likeness. So a very interesting time for the space overall.
I've definitely written before that I could do some kind of NIL story every week, and I wouldn't be writing the same story. And I don't do that in part because I understand some people are just sick of this, right? And that includes some ADs. That includes some people that some .edus are like, bro, I don't care anymore. So I think my barrier for what constitutes an interesting story has risen a little bit. This did strike me as unique, and I'm interested to see where it ends up going. I mean, I did talk to like 2 people there for an hour each time, and neither of them really brought up recruiting at all, which is very different from many other NIL collective conversations that I have had. There's one other off the field businessy thing here that I do want to very kind of quickly talk about. It's something I haven't written really about this week. I'm going to touch on a little bit in the Friday extra points, and that is what's going on with the Big 12 television deal right now. And part of the reason I've hesitated to really jump into this is because I feel like there's just been a lot of baloney written about this, and of course you can't talk about the Big 12 anything business wise without also mentioning the Pac-12 over the last 3.5 months, where you have a couple of people affiliated with schools or commissioners in both leagues trying to wish cast things into the narrative. And a couple of writers that are closely aligned with those camps. I think, I don't want to be unkind, but diligently sharing that particular perspective. So it's been harder for me to kind of sit back and think like what is real versus what is somebody trying to publicly negotiate on Twitter or through their platform. But based on Big 12 commissioners' public comments here after some media blitzes, it would appear that the league would like to make a decision relatively quickly about whether they're going to hit the open market or wait to hit the open market for their television rights, or sign a new deal, renew early, which, as best as I understand it, would mean re-upping with ESPN and FOX, their current partners. I want to use the right language here. We could expect a decision about whether to make a decision relatively soon, rather than I don't think there's going to be like a deal announced tomorrow. There could be one in the coming weeks. I guess I have a couple of thoughts about the broad strategy here, but is there anything about this process so far that has surprised you? Because it certainly seems from on the outside, everything with the Big 12 seems to be happening at an expedited timeline compared to the Pac-12 or perhaps even the Big 10 with how they went through this, their media rights process.
Well, yeah, I think the speed of things is the biggest, I guess, eye opener for me is just typically these TV deals take a long time to negotiate and go through and
Yeah.
go through the with a fine tooth comb. And kudos to the Big 12 is getting this done. I think this we're still going to end up waiting well past next week in order to kind of actually finalize some of these things or get any announcements. But look,
Yeah.
they're in a different boat because I think they want cost certainty. Both from a television broadcasting side, you want to know how much you're going to end up paying a lot of these Big 12 schools going forward. And on the flip side is how much are these Big 12 schools going to get because they're going through membership changes right now. I think locking them in, ideally, certainly from the school perspective, with some increases, over the couple of years to withstand the loss of Texas and Oklahoma, are huge. And they understand, I think, the landscape of, what, the NBA is on the horizon. We have the CFP going to market for sure in the next couple of years as well. So those are two big fish that are going to soak up a lot of dollars. If you can kind of get in ahead of that and at least kind of lock in your structure for the next couple of years, that I think that would be beneficial for the league, not just keeping it together, but I think for the schools themselves understanding, hey, here's what we're kind of getting into together. And from every, I mean, this is very much an extension of kind of the current deal. They do have to work around some inventory changes when they have the new members come in, and then obviously you're losing Texas and Oklahoma. So it's probably a very difficult deal, just based on my talk with folks in terms of figuring out all those little numbers and all the minor details about, like, all right, well, you're going to pick first on this in 2022 and 2023, and then we got
Yeah.
those are all the things that the lawyers and the TV executives are trying to hash out right now. But I think it's big for the Big 12, especially if they can get in and actually get a deal done ahead of the Pac-12.
Getting ahead of the Pac-12, I think, is meaningful. Less so because that means, like, oh shit, they're gonna go steal Arizona or whatever. Like, that is different.
Well, they're in two different boats. Like, this
Yeah.
is the Big 12 cannot go to the open market. They cannot talk to an Amazon. They cannot talk to an Apple. The Pac-12 can, and
Right.
that is differentiator. I mean, the Pac-12 can chop their packages up in a far different manner than what is currently under the current Big 12 umbrella with Fox and ESPN. This is very much an extension. This is very much focused on that membership change. And I'm going to be interested to see what kind of the deal term might end up being as part of all this. But the Big 12 is just they've tried to kind of take their biggest disadvantage of going last and trying to at least spin it as a positive. I think hopefully that will get done for a lot of those schools. But what those ultimate numbers are going to look like, I just don't get the sense that there's going to be a huge gap in terms of what the ESPN, those first tier rights from ESPN and Fox are going to be from Big 12 side to the Pac-12 side. I don't think there is going to be a massive gap that I know a lot of folks in the Big 12 territory have been talking up. I would be very surprised if they end up being several, $10 million or whatever ahead of what the Pac-12 will ultimately end up getting.
I've heard that exact same thing, and I've heard that for months. What is interesting, I mean, to kind of finish, piggyback on that, one of the things that I think would be meaningful if they did get this done earlier is that they might be able to then have access or a pick of broadcast windows ahead of what may potentially be available for the Pac-12 but that their Pac-12 is also going to be more streaming anyway. The other thing that's more interesting to me about all of this, though, actually has nothing to do with top line money and has nothing to do with specific broadcast partners. What's been super fascinating to me from afar is how aggressive the Big 12 seems to be, or at least presenting about trying to raise money and generate revenue independent of just that linear broadcast deal, particularly in the sponsorship space and particularly in how that league is branded or defined. So it's meaningful. It's interesting to have your commissioner do a multi-day media blitz in New York City when you don't have any teams anywhere close to New York. Then you don't have fan bases or alumni bases that are really heavily concentrated in New York. They've talked about doing something similar in Los Angeles. They just league announced that they're going to partner with an advertising agency to help with the league's rebranding. You hear Yormark talking about, we're going to lean into influencer marketing. We're going to lead into music-based activations. We're going to be big with celebrities, and we're trying to make this league young and cool and influential. And we've talked about this, and like I am well aware that I am not cool. that I am not connected to the youth. I am not connected to, to what's hip and what's happening. So I don't want to superimpose like my own instincts. I mean, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. I honestly have no idea. But the thought process and how you might execute it and what makes this league easy to do that or very difficult to do that, I think that's interesting to me. So earlier this week, I actually talked to one of my friends about this because I am not an ad guy, but I know a lot of ad guys. One of my buddies, a guy named Jake Welch, has been in advertising for over a decade. He's worked on a couple of big national campaigns. And as a BYU guy, BYU has a pretty famous ad lab and sends a lot of people to Leo Burnett and to a lot of the big firms on Madison Avenue and in Chicago and around the country. And I was talking to him like, what would you do if you were given this account? Like what strategies would you do here? What do you think are some potential pitfalls? What are things that like an ad guy or an agency would look at when evaluating this league? What are its opportunities? What are its challenges? Those sorts of things. So I do think we'll be able to share some of that audio here at the end of the show, because I can hypothesize and kind of spitball things here. But I think it'd be nice to talk to somebody that actually has a little bit of subject matter expertise.
Well, before we get into the interview, I just got to say that
Yeah.
it does feel not to rain on anybody's parade in the Big 12 territory, but it does feel a little bit right out of the early Larry Scott playbook, if I do say so myself. Going to New York, something that Larry Scott did with the Pac-12, took the coaches a lot of coaches and executives, actually announced the creation of the Pac-12 networks in New York, not San Francisco, not LA. It was in New York that he launched all that, all the sponsorship stuff. That was actually something that I chatted with George Klavkov about not too long ago, kind of when he took over. They've made some big pushes out in Pac-12 territory about signing some of those sponsorship deals, because that's truthfully those are the margins that you can kind of operate. Yeah. You got an 8 year television contract, whether you're running it down or not. Those that is set, and so it's like how can we continue to bring in additional revenue for the schools? A lot of those sponsorship agreements, marketing agreements, that is the way that you can do it. But I mean, this is the rebranding to make things cooler and hipper. I think I have the old slides at some point somewhere regarding the old Pac-12 when they went through their rebranding. I actually have somebody sent me that deck, and like I actually, you can tell the old, and like they want to be innovative and cool, you should
and hip, send that to me. Like we should write about that. Like, revisiting this. This is a good point. I had forgotten that this was dropped in New York.
As soon as I saw the news there in the D1 ticker, of course, about the Big 12 hiring these folks and kind of doing this whole process. That was like the first thing that popped in my mind was like, man, do they really know that this might be strewed just a little bit as kind of a page out of the Larry Scott handbook? But I digress. I think Brett Yormark, look, all the folk I've talked with the Big 12, they've liked him, that they think he's a breath of fresh air, and really has injected some energy, around the Big 12, and they want that to continue. Hopefully it translates into the dollar figures, as they mitigate the loss of Texas and Oklahoma in 2025. But, I think everybody understands that, not everything, is as easy as saying we're going to be the cool hip conference.
Yeah. And I don't even know what hip is anymore, man.
Because when you think of hip, Stillwater, Oklahoma, let me tell you, and Manhattan, Kansas, is definitely.
Yeah, I mean, when I think what is hip, I still think Tower of Power, which just goes to show that I am not the person who should be the arbitrator of these kind of things. Although, I mean, Tower of Power was pretty cool. Maybe not so much now when they're playing like the state fair circuit, but in like 1978, I bet they were pretty cool. You know what else is pretty cool? Home Field Apparel, our title sponsor of this podcast, a great friend of the D1 ticker, extended universe, and manufacturers of fine, exceptionally comfortable clothing with your favorite college logos and college IP on them. I am wearing the Indiana tuxedo again right now. It's a little bit chilly here. We're recording this on a Thursday evening, so I am wearing a Marquette hoodie. Underneath that Marquette hoodie is here we go. We got the Anteaters for Irvine over here with Fisher. Underneath this hoodie, I'm wearing an Ohio State early 80s block O with like the italics kind of action. And then I'm wearing some Doggers, which are great because not only are they overwhelmingly, easily the most comfortable sweatpants I've ever owned in my entire life, they've got a sad dog on them. which is great. The Dogs probably sad because it seemed like for a minute UConn might make a bowl game this year, and they're probably not, but they're at least conventionally bad. The only good take that I had this entire preseason was that UConn would not be biblically bad anymore. They would be regular garden variety bad, and by God that they are. They're probably going to win 5 games. And they've got UConn stuff on home field apparel. They have Marquette stuff. They have UC Irvine stuff. They just dropped what might be honestly one of their best collections ever with that with the Marshall. I don't know if it's a rebrand or refresh. There's more Marshall stuff. There's a black T-shirt with the buffalo on it. It's really good. I'll probably throw in a link to it in the show notes on Extra Point so you can see it. And when you go buy stuff from these guys, because they make really good clothes, clothes that we wear all the time. If you buy stuff from them, use promo code Extra Points to save 15% off that order. Help tell the boys and girls in Indianapolis that they should continue to sponsor us. You get some comfortable clothes. You get to show yourself off as the wisest, most enlightened person in your tailgate. Everybody wins. Homefieldapparel.com. Before we call in, bring in the guest audio here, I think I want to take a quick opportunity to plug everything else that we've been working on here for this week. And the week beyond, because we're going to have a slightly different schedule moving forward. Next week, I will be in Charlotte. I will be on assignment. I do not know what my schedule is going to be like, so there's a decent chance you will not hear my dulcet tones on both of the podcasts for next week, but there'll be some more about what I'm doing in the Queen City on Extra Points. What else have you been up to, Brian?
Getting busy for the kind of closing stretch here of the season. Doing a lot of planning for a lot of future interviews with commissioners and ADs and whatnot as we kind of approach the season where we're often and traveling as you will be next week. But got a lot of stuff cooking as well. We got some big games coming up, so writing about that for Fox Sports as well over the weekend. And I think the overarching theme that I've come to find out this last week is not only have we hit the midway point, kind of in the college football season, but we got college basketball starting. So there's a whole lot of focus on that. And, those CFP rankings, they are right around the corner. So I will be occupying a lot of people like my time as well. So
I had forgotten about that.
Trust me, not having to tune into that show and wait around, for who's number 24 and trying to find some takes, if you will, about the committee's work. You're in a blessed position.
That is blessed. There's a lot I deeply miss about my time at SB Nation. Shit like that is not it. Like I thoroughly enjoy. Like, you know what? I don't have to watch every terrible November college basketball game. I don't have to watch this playoff selection show. I don't have to watch a lot of streaming sports television if I don't want to, and I go to bed well before the Hawaii game, which is pretty great. But I'm glad that other people are out there to shoulder that burden. We beyond the Utah Collective story, I also interviewed a manufacturer and designer of mascots this week on Extra Points. We did a mailbag earlier this week and answered some of your questions about administrative stuff and expanding tournaments and some realignment things. We should have a commissioner interview that I think you'll be interested to hear about on Extra Points next week, and some more updates on the travel front. So before my voice gives out here, thanks everyone for tuning in. We're going to kick it to Jake to kind of explain a little bit more about how on earth you make West Virginia and Cincinnati and Kansas State and BYU cool if someone gave you a big stack of money to go do so. And we will catch up with you in a couple of days. Why don't we kind of start with that? Like, when I think of the Big 12 and I look at it, I see a league that has a bunch of interesting athletic brands, but schools that are very different, and coming up with some kind of cohesive brand story when you have a BYU and a West Virginia, which is the opposite of BYU, and a UCF and a Kansas State. I think that might be a challenge. Am I reading that incorrectly here? Or tell me what you think when you look at this entity?
100%. It's so hard to go into this saying, oh, this is the cohesive story that threads together all of these universities. It's not like the SEC, where it just means more and that whole campaign. But there's no specific tie regionally. I mean, the Pac-12 still has that. The Big Ten obviously does not have that anymore. But there's no specific thing that you can really say, oh yeah, this is what, at least on on the outside, you can't say like, okay, yeah, this is the thing that really ties us together culturally. And I think that is going to be a tough thing to try and grapple with for some of these creative teams, especially with an agency in translation that's based in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, and it's worked mostly with New York entities or 95 corridor entities, right?
Yeah, if you look primarily at their portfolio, a lot of what they do and a lot of what they do really well is NBA focused work. Like they did a lot of the NBA's 75th anniversary creative. It's really steeped in amazing, deep, insights and references. It's fantastic work, and you can see that they are really understanding of what is moving and understanding culture, specifically within the subculture of the NBA, and then all the team subcultures within that. So they know and understand that. But now you're taking a lot of probably coastal creative teams saying, okay, go understand Waco, Texas, Stillwater, Orlando, Houston, Provo, Utah. Try and piece something together from this. And I think that, any good creative agency will tell their creative teams this. Obviously we understand what is cool and what is interesting. And it's fascinating to look at what your Mark is saying in these interviews, saying, oh yeah, we want to be at we want to connect with youth culture. We want to contemporize. We want to modernize. They'll know how to do that. It's making sure that whatever they do from a creative perspective doesn't clash with the brand and the personality that you have existing within these universities. Because then you run the risk of the Steve Buscemi, hello, fellow kids.
Yeah, and this was part of what I was thinking about. In your opinion, is this even the right question to be asking? Like, how do we make our conference of somewhat mismatched universities and mostly Great Plains, research institutions or land-grant institutions? How do we make that contemporary and interesting and cool to youth culture, particularly not just in New York, but if I heard your remark correctly, also Los Angeles? Do you think that's the right thing to be talking about here?
I think if you do it in the right way, right? If it's how do we take, culture and infuse it into something, that's not going to work, because that's when it's hey, let's get Jack Harlow to come do this thing, or let's go get this person who's cool to represent this maybe not so cool thing right now. What you need to do is take the personality, the unique nature of each of these member institutions, try and find something that and elevate it from there, as opposed to try and hand-fisting something into, oh, here's what's cool about Provo, Utah, or here's what's cool about this thing.
Yeah.
I think you focus on the fascinating prospect of this basketball conference. I think that's a huge thing, because obviously basketball, youth culture, there's a lot of things there that can work really well with some of the connections that they're trying to make with music and with other elements of culture. I think that you can focus on that. And then you can also focus on the fact that, unlike most of these other conferences, and this is such a tricky thing to do in a creative way, but every other conference has the blue blood institution that leads the way. They never advertise it. The Pac-12 isn't, hey, it's Oregon and USC's conference and the rest of these teams. They try and advertise that here's everything, here's the whole group, here's our academic member institutions, here's this.
Yeah.
What the Big 12 can do is say, this is up for grabs. If you're a student athlete and you want to go to a place and you don't want to go to Kentucky and be in the shadow of everyone, be in the shadow of Alabama and all the other football schools. You don't want to go to, you don't want to go to Indiana and be in the shadow of those other schools. If you go to the Big 12, if you go to any of these schools, you can be the top dog, or you can be the school, because there isn't a specific school that, from a financial or resource perspective, that's going to tower over everyone else. Like, you can really leave your mind. I think that's what a lot of schools try and sell you on anyways. That's not like, oh, come be a part of the biggest institution in all of college sports. It's, hey, come to Kansas, because we're going to, I'm sure that's what Lance Leipold's pitch was to all of his recruits, right? Was, hey, we're going to build something. We're going to do something unique, and we're going to build something that you can be proud of, and you're going to leave your mark on this university and on this conference. I think you can kind of similarly say that, where it's, it's almost like he's saying it's open for business. It's, you're not stuck to being with one school or with one brand. It's, this isn't just how we do things in the conference. It's almost like the Wild West. And that, I think, being able to, take all of those thoughts and understanding, okay, that things are so, adaptable and amenable and movable from an athletic perspective, distill that down into something that's interesting in terms of a creative brief and let a team work off of that. And then I think you're fine. As long as it's not just, let's make something cool, because you can't do that.
No, that would be the most dad thing possible, right? Let's make carrots cool. It's not a thing. And I think you're right. I can see how this would be really exciting from like a creative perspective or like an agency perspective, because if you're working with the Big Ten, for good or for ill, the Big Ten's like identity and image is pretty ossified. They've been doing the same thing for 150 years. It's we are the Midwestern Ivy, at least in terms of tradition is concerned, and Woody Hayes and blah, blah, blah. And if like you do something with Ohio State's color scheme that's a little bit off, there's a congressional investigation. You are what you are. And this is a time here where you get to maybe project something different. I've joked about this with some of my colleagues. One of the other things that makes this campaign fascinating to me is some of these schools aren't cool. And like I say that with love, like there's a lot of things I think we could say about BYU and the culture around BYU, like youth oriented or cool is not one of them. And when I think of Baylor, even if Baylor has been very successful athletically in a bunch of different sports, cool is not really the first thing that I think of. I think if you spend a lot of time, I mean, like, I don't know. I know a lot of Baylor grads. I don't know if cool or youth oriented or hip would necessarily be the things that attach to those. Can you, I mean, if you were given this account and you're like, okay, you have a lot of runaway, you can make things your own, but also a couple of the schools here are not hip. Like, how would you think about that? Is there a way to turn some of those negatives into potential positives? Or would you kind of try to lean away from school specific branding and really lean into the league?
I think that, any good agency is going to send their people to each of these universities and each of the member institutions to really understand the culture and the nature of each of these places. Because if they don't do that, like any good agency will tell you this, they'll tell their creative teams this. We're obviously cool people from California or from New York or Chicago.
Yeah.
What you need to, like, this is what I remember.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
A great creative would always say, if we're working on brands like Target, Domino's Pizza, Best Buy. If you really want to understand and make great advertising, you need to go to the Midwest or go somewhere in the South at least once a year so you can understand who's watching your ads. And so if translation's smart, they're going to send their teams, out to each of these campuses to understand, okay, what's going on here? And you don't want to only make it insular to, we need to make sure that the BYU fans are happy. We need to make sure the Oklahoma State fans are happy. The West Virginia fans are happy. Because, trying to do that, you're not going to please everyone. But you want to be able to at least hint to or be grounded in something that's real. And like you said, not say, hey, BYU is this thing, or all of our member institutions are cool. What you can do is find the nuggets, right? Like I was watching a couple commercials the other day. I was watching some of the SEC ones where they made small references to each of the unique things about some of the programs. If it's like the Hedges down in Athens or whatever it is, like there's certain things that while BYU as a whole is not cool, there's still specific athletes that have come out of BYU that are interesting. Or personalities, certain things like the volleyball, incident, notwithstanding BYU's volleyball setup and their just like the fan, interactions that they have there. It's really unique and interesting.
Yeah, you can get 8,000 people to a volleyball game there, which is not something that most of the Big 12 like. That is cool.
Yeah,
the mountains are cool. Like there's cool. I mean, there's specific things there. Sure, okay.
And I think it's focusing in on. And it's tough because it's like, how do you take these nuggets, these small things, if it's athletes, if it's venues, if it's, just like quirky things about these universities, how can you tie that all in together into an entire conference story? And maybe it's that, right? Where it's like, if you go to an SEC school, like what's all that different? And I know that there's a massive difference, but like, what is all that difference when you go and you look in the stands at Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn? If you go into that student section, you're seeing bros and polos, or you're seeing, the girls in Uggs and black leggings or whatever. It's like pretty much the same, the same type of feel. If you took a snapshot and took away the colors, you're gonna say like, oh, that's an SEC.
Yeah, especially if there's ties, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. But if you go, if you took a snapshot of the student section at BYU, at UCF, at Houston, at West Virginia, it's like we got a little bit of everything,
Yeah.
And there's something unique, and I don't know if that's as big a selling point as you can make it out to be, where it's like, hey, there's nothing that is wholly, specific to, like, not every single team has every single thing about this in our conference. Like we have, we have basketball schools, we have schools in mountains, we have schools by the beach, we have schools in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. It's everything. So I think there's a way to make that, not that it's not like these are all the, redheaded stepchildren of like their states, but kind of, right? Like every single one of these programs is not like the institution of their state. It's Oklahoma State.
It's just Kansas, right? Like that's probably the only example.
I mean, and then in Utah, BYU probably is the largest, most recognizable in terms of, it's BYU and Utah, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. Like Kansas is probably the only one where it's like, oh yeah. I mean, Iowa is definitely, probably seen larger, more important than Iowa State. And I think that goes for everyone else. So it's almost the underdog mentality. It's like, how do you brand this as like the underdog conference without being like, oh yeah, we're the little tough guys, right?
Sure. Yeah. And that I think kind of dovetails to the last big question. To your point, to my understanding, most of the schools in the Big 12 are still relatively regional. I mean, obviously you have fans all over the country, but if you're a fan of Kansas State, there's a decent chance that you live within 500 miles of Kansas State. The bulk of BYU fans, certainly not all of them, I know that international brand, the bulk of them live in the Pacific and Mountain time zones, right? Like you're mostly in the Book of Mormon belt. You are
the Jello belt,
the Jello belts, the original state of Deseret, whatever, right? Like you're in this area, and you don't tend to have huge concentrations of alumni in New York and Los Angeles. BYU is in Los Angeles, I know, and there's clearly some people because these are gigantic cities, but within the ACC and the Big Ten and the Pac-12, as much larger and more national universities tend to have larger alumni concentrations in those markets. If you're not already really there, what do you think is the value or the impetus to make sure that you become there, knowing that maybe that sales cycle looks a little bit different than it might be for the Big Ten, where you already have half of Michigan's student body is already from suburban New Jersey, and they're already going to be in that media market,
Yeah, I think it's the value is in the conversation and kind of being in that mindset. And I kind of going back to what Yormark said, I thought it was interesting. He says he wants to be on the conscience of the future student athletes, right?
Okay.
So this isn't so much about like, how do we excite our fan base or being in these conversations in these specific markets, to help bring up the conversation with alumni or whatever.
Yeah.
It's more about, okay, how can we speak to maybe this younger generation and say, hey, you might be from New Jersey, or you might be from California, or you might be from the state of Washington, Texas, or whatever. This is why you should consider the Big 12. I think that the SEC and the Big Ten, they are obviously going to have their super powerful brands and member institutions that are going to be able to lure these specific student athletes. But I think that he's saying, okay, from a brand perspective, what can we do to at least be a part of the conversation?
Okay.
Right. So I think that's probably they're in their mind. And I think what Yormark is thinking, okay, we can only do so much from the athletic standpoint. Like, I think he's probably thinking to himself, I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that the football and basketball of this conference, from a competitive standpoint, is going to put us in a position to succeed always. But if we can also increase conversation and relevance, then that's going to help at least potentially, within the recruiting circles, maybe bring more attention to our conference and at least increase consideration within that group.
No, that makes sense. And I would also imagine, if your background is so heavily tied to New York or to the East Coast, and you're in the sponsorship of the multimedia rights business, the more people elsewhere are talking about you, perhaps the more easier it might be to sell somebody and becoming the official beef jerky of the Big 12. But from the recruiting perspective, makes a ton of sense. Jake, the last thing I like to ask in here is there anything that you think I should be asking that I haven't about trying to understand all of this right now? Because you're the expert and I am the dumbass.
It's such a fascinating thing. I'm really going to be curious to see how the translation is leveraged, not just from a creative standpoint on creative consulting in terms of like advertising spots and imaging. I mean, they're going to continue to work with LDWW, which I think is more of like an event branding agency. Like you see them, they're going to be, I mean, they're a Dallas, Oklahoma City agency. So they're going to be like boots on the ground for translation and saying like, hey,
sure.
Yeah, you'll be able to help us understand most of these institutions, and at least in terms of some of the events that we're going to go to. But beyond just messaging, like, is translation going to be able to help influence how they operate? You know, like anytime an ad agency gets briefed in onto a project, you know, the initial brief is, hey, help us with this 30-second video, help us with this even campaign. Yeah. But sometimes you want to be able to go and say, hey, what can you do to change your product? Or what can you do to change like your approach in this way? And I think that they'll be given the leeway, I would think, because I think that translation is a decent enough agency to be able to help influence all parts of the brand, that they'll be able to go in and say, oh, here's what you can do with your broadcasts. Here's what you can do with your TV production partners, right? I think that's the thing that, and I think that your Mark's probably asking is, okay, we're going to be partnered with ESPN or Fox or maybe a streaming service. What can we do to make our product even more unique outside of that? And I think that as a creative, that is the most fascinating stuff. And I remember doing some consulting work with Amazon about 4 years ago, and they had just started to broadcast the NFL games, and they were starting to ask similar questions. They're saying, what can we do to stand out from all these other networks that broadcast NFL games? Yeah. Make sure that whenever people come to this and they say, oh yeah, this is an Amazon football watching experience. This isn't just Fox, but on my phone, or Fox, but on my computer. So I think that's the thing that I'm most curious about, because you can run as many commercials as you want and you can spend a bunch of money, but the biggest way to kind of change the perception is you have lots of people that are going to watch these games. Is there something unique that you can do within the broadcast or within other parts of the brand experience? Because that's another thing that a lot of agencies will, tell their clients is, you can say, better ingredients, better pizza, whatever this. But if you really don't have those things, then why are we saying it, right? Like we can run a campaign, but if it's not truly aligned to what it is, like if the Big 12 comes out and says, oh yeah, we're culturally relevant, but if that doesn't align with every brand touch point, then that's not going to fall flat. So I'm more curious about all the other opportunities that a creative agency or these kind of marketing folks that your Mark's bringing in, what they can do to at least level up from those positions.
That's a great point. I hadn't really thought about the relationship that an agency might have with either a broadcast partner or with the school to give them advice or how to talk about what else you could be doing during that particular experience, because that is how more people are going to interface with these brands beyond a commercial or an activation in Oklahoma City or visiting campus. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And you don't have a channel to produce 24/7 propaganda like some of the other places do.
And any good agency who's worth their salt will do that, right? They'll say, oh yeah, here are all these opportunities and events or stunts or whatever it is that you can do to elevate or to really at least, or to connect. And I'm curious to see, at least your Mark's kind of mentioned in a few different places, influencers and at least the influence community. And I'm sure there's a lot of opportunity with Instagram and TikTok and a lot of these other specific social channels to say, okay, what can you do with probably some unique personalities at each of these universities to connect with this young group of students, right? It's like, okay, if you're really wanting to speak to this incoming 13 to 18 group of potential students where maybe you're not trying to get all of the athletes, but hey, maybe you want to increase enrollment or, applications to some of these specific universities. Yeah, you can do that if there's an interesting influencer opportunity. Again, it can't be something that's just like, oh, hey, we got Charlie D'Amelio to come do a TikTok dance with the TCU Horned Frog. Come hang out at TCU, right?
Yeah.
It has to start from the ground up. It's like, okay, what are the interesting, social people or interesting movements that are happening on these campuses, and then elevate them from there.
That makes sense. Jake, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us. This has been extremely helpful.